This is Steven. You may know him for some clips like these.
Stay off the damn weed.
That's number one. Number two, and more importantly, Kwame Brown is gone. The City of Angels, Hollywood, just should be celebrated. Throw a parade already, whether you win a championship or not. This man was a bona fide scrub. He can't play.
That we have been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok, and flat out deceived.
Steven makes over $15 million a year working for ESPN, and he's made himself quite an empire. But it wasn't always like this for Steven. For a long time, he was poor, counted out, and hopeless. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind to Smith's beginning, because baby Steven had to be pretty cute. I'm sorry, Steve, but we're going to be going into your bedroom. Steven in the 70s is a young boy growing up in Queens. In a few decades, that little Queens boy is going to become one of the highest paid announcers in the entire world. He's going to go on to put his name with some of the biggest sports icons ever, and of these 10 dudes, Smith is one of just 3 who's made his living mostly outside of football. But for now, he's still just that kid in Queens. Smith was the baby of the family, born in '67, and with 5 older siblings to look up to. See, I told you guys he'd be cute. Now, Steven started going to school at a pretty normal age, but as soon as he was in the classroom, things started to go south. Steven did not do well at school. He was held back in the 3rd grade and forced to go to summer school, and in 4th grade, he was held back again and forced to repeat the entire year. He struggled so much as a boy that his mother would often worry about his future in front of him. But his father, he didn't really share that same worry. Steven himself describes his father as a bad person who really had no hope for Steven. As a boy, he remembers a specific conversation where he overheard his parents discussing him, and that's when a very young Stephen A. Smith heard his father tell his mother, quote, "The boy ain't smart. He's not going to do anything with his life. Just get over it." From his own father. His parents weren't his only doubters, though. Teachers in school had all but given up on Stephen, assuming him to just be dumb and unhelpable. But while they were busy working with other students, they really had no idea what the truth was. And his parents didn't either. Steven had a learning disability. Dyslexia is diagnosed in about 1 out of 5 people, and it's often mistaken for low intelligence in a child. However, dyslexia has nothing to do with actual intelligence. Steven was being massively held back by this disability, but he still had a full personality waiting to shine on the inside. With the help of his mother and sisters, but still not his father, he learned to read properly in a way that he could understand. Soon after, Steven started showing glimpses of the star he could become. He was about to make this quote a flat-out lie, and I don't know, something about seeing all of that, knowing this, it somehow makes it nicer to see a picture like this. You earned it, Steve. Nice job. But we still got a long way to go before we can chief a cigar on ESPN property. You've seen Steven's childhood, and it wasn't the prettiest one, even if it's not the normal bad childhood we're used to. His father had lost hope in him, and for a while, everyone had, because of an undiagnosed disability they didn't even know he had. But after he worked through all of that, it was clear once Stephen A. Smith found something he actually liked, he could be amazing at it. And that thing he chose was basketball. You could make the argument for sports entirely. I mean, he's got this really cool poster of all the sports, but Steven mainly played and mainly covers and focuses on basketball. And it's basketball that made him a worldwide icon. Before he analyzed it hilariously, he played basketball. And he wasn't a bad player. Well, Smith received a scholarship to play Division II basketball at Winston-Salem State University. And laugh all you want at his stat line or that it's a D2, but who cares, man? The guy got a paid education to play basketball. About 3.5% of people who play high school basketball are even able to move on and play it at the NCAA level. So no matter what division, Stevens beat the odds. And living through his rough childhood alone, he had already beaten the odds. But none of those are the craziest stat that he beat. Kids growing up in these impoverished areas only go to college about 9% of the time. And more so, only 16% of these kids become economically successful adults. Stephen A. Smith is an outlier in every sense of the word. He wasn't supposed to be here, but now he was. He was hooping in college. Now, his stat line was nothing special for sure. Stephen couldn't even crack the LeVar Ball mark at 1.5 points a game, and I wouldn't say he was a passer either, with about an assist a game to go with it. But what Stephen was undoubtedly ahead of the game on was three-point shooting. Like, he couldn't do anything else, I guess. I wish we had more film or video. I guess no one really cared enough, but what we do have are some awesome stats. First and foremost, Stephen did not score a 2-point basket his entire senior year, shooting 5 for 22 on threes and 0 for 3 on 2-pointers. This sounds a lot more normal, I feel like, today with the 3-point jacking we have, but I think we should appreciate the historical context of this happening in 1990. In basketball terms, 1990 is a different universe, and this sticks out possibly the most with the 3-ball. For what's becoming a crowd favorite, teams shot just 6.5 threes a game in 1990, compared to 33 a game nowadays. A star player like Mike was only averaging 1 3 a game, and Mark Price led the league with 2.1 threes per game made. To hit this league-leading mark, Mark shot a total of 374 three-pointers. Currently this season, which keep in mind there's still about 15 or 20 games left in, there are 30 different players who have shot that many threes. It is a different game entirely. Stephen's fighting for time on the team, and he's not doing too well. We know that the stats aren't there, but it's not because Stephen's in a bad place. In fact, he's surrounded with assets to help him succeed. And the best of those assets, his head coach. Clarence Big House Gaines is one of the most established college coaches of all time. Before young Stephen ever got to Winston-Salem State, Gaines had already racked up hundreds of wins there, placing him second on the all-time list when he retired. But while Smith was there from 88 to 91, Gaines was no doubt on his way out. The guy was just getting old. I mean, he was born 16 years before World War II started. And with his age, Gaines had some rough health issues weighing on him. While Stephen was there, everyone could notice that Big House was not himself. This is when the world started to get their first taste of Stephen A. Smith, the journalist. While still a member of the basketball team, Smith also wrote for the school newspaper. And as we know now, Stephen A. Smith is not scared to say anything to make a story. But they couldn't have known that then. If they did, maybe his coach would have answered one of his personal phone calls. Stephen had the story ready to break, but he wanted to talk to his coach about it first. He reached out multiple times, but his own coach ignored him. So Stephen dropped his article. For a young, aspiring journalist to call out someone like Clarence Gaines, someone with that resume, it's a ballsy move. But to do it while playing on his basketball team, That is an unorthodox and fearless way of showing you give absolutely zero fucks. Stephen's article insisted that for health reasons, Gaines should step down. His own storied coach that he was still playing under. Stephen faced immense backlash for the article, his first time of many experiencing that as a journalist. The school chancellor and several school administrators wanted him expelled. But Smith had his hero rise up from the most unlikely of places. The very coach he called out protected Stephen and made sure he faced no punishment or censorship. Gaines knew Stephen, he knew he wanted to be a journalist, and he knew he had to speak his mind. That was his job, was to report his own truth, and Gaines knew that, and he knew Smith had a gift. This moment, in my opinion, had to have served as a huge catalyst for Stephen A. becoming who he is today. To have not just anyone, but a power figure in sports assure to him that he can say and report whatever he wants and feels, proving to him that he doesn't need to be afraid of the backlash, it's just about time for Stephen to take over the sports world. Trust me, it's not for a lack of trying, but I have no clue what Stephen was up to after he graduated in 1991. The only piece of information I could find was that he lost his brother in 1992 to a car accident. I have to imagine this contributed to the only period of Stephen A. Smith's life that's unreported. You can find his childhood home and where his parents worked, but for whatever reason, after college, he went dark for a bit. With no trace on the internet of this small period of time, I choose to believe he just took some time to himself. Grappling with losing a loved one, especially that young, couldn't have been easy on Stephen. And those few years of grieving and silence, they paid off. He landed a sweet gig with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and a few years out of college with no major experience, this is the job a journalist dreams of. Starting out a career is the hardest step, and it can often take years for even a good journalist to finally get noticed and get pay that can support them. But now Stephen was already working for a mainstream company that was known nationwide. It's impossible to know just how he scored the job, but he never looked back. Maybe the Philadelphia Inquirer just got lucky and the young kid they hired just happened to explode in the sports world. Or maybe they saw something in him. Something that was boiling over and ready to blow. He continued writing there for a few more years, gaining popularity and achieving success as a sports writer. He even became the beat writer for the Philadelphia 76ers, getting his name really out there in sports. But of course, to be big in sports, especially at that time, there was one name you had to be with. And in 2003, the young, dyslexic boy from the Bronx was hired by ESPN, reaching the peak of the sports world and having endless potential. That same boy whose father said he'd never be good enough was the very best at what he did. He'd climbed the mountain, and now there was endless success in front of him. At ESPN, Smith was given his own national show slot within 2 years, hosting Quite Frankly. The public slowly grew to love Stephen, and in many cases loved to argue with him, but more than anything, people respected and continue to respect his willingness to stand proudly behind his opinion, no matter how controversial. ESPN's been around long enough now to have a pretty storied history, and there's many a great who have been the face of this company. A scan through this chart brings goosebumps in different ways for me. I can literally hear some of these voices just looking at this. And if you don't agree with John Anderson being up there, I highly encourage you to watch some old This Is SportsCenter commercials. The guy has the skills of an actor. And I think it's pretty fair to say, Stephen A. Smith has solidified his face up here. He's different from any guy on this chart, too. See, Stephen's face got here through a variety of different shows. As I said, he started with Quite Frankly, which ended pretty quick. He then started appearing as a familiar guest on shows like Pardon the Interruption and NBA Countdown. But eventually, we saw him anchoring the main stage on consistent episodes of SportsCenter. However, in 2012, the big one came. ESPN announced Stephen A. to permanently co-host First Take. Alongside Skip Bayless and eventually Max Kellerman, Stephen A. Smith shot his popularity to all-time highs with First Take. Not only was the show popular, but some of its best moment clips were everywhere in sports media. And they still are to this day, albeit to a lesser degree. Stephen has had a couple other shows come through since, some of his own even, but it's just icing on the cake. The cake that sits atop of the sports media world, above just about every single other cake. His TV shows started him off, but what catapulted Stephen into mainstream media territory has been his constant appearance as a celebrity. You see the guy all over social media in different methods. He takes any interview who asks, except mine, I guess. And he just has himself being seen as a famous person. People who don't watch sports know who Stephen A. Smith is, because he's turned himself into more than a sportscaster. He wrote a book. You gotta be famous to write a book. Stephen, yes, he's a great basketball analyst, but he's famous. He's a celebrity. He goes to the award shows and he gets pictures taken of him. He made it. You really did, Stephen. Congrats.